After opting to not hold a major showcase in 2022, PlayStation finally held its first major presentation since September 2021 a couple of weeks ago. And needless to say, we were all hungry for PlayStation news, and fan expectations were through the roof. After all, apart from knowing Insomniac have Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine in development, and that Naughty Dog is working on a multiplayer Last of Us game, we had no idea what the vast majority of PlayStation's first-party studios were working on. What could Bluepoint's next remake be? Are we going to get a tease of Ghost of Tsushima 2? Could studios like Bend be ready to show what they've been working on? All these questions, combined with swirling rumours and speculation about some high-profile third-party games, like the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, meant that this showcase had more expectations placed on it than maybe any other showcase in recent memory. We were expecting Sony to come out swinging and knock it out of the park. And as a lifelong PlayStation fan, I'm shocked to say that overall, I was left quite disappointed by this showcase. Maybe part of that disappointment stems from overexcitement and the vicious media hype cycle, but even taking that into account, I think Sony really dropped the ball here, and didn't show enough to even justify the existence of this showcase. That's not to say that there weren't exciting, high-quality games shown here, but this bloated presentation felt more like a glorified state of play than a huge PlayStation event. Nevertheless, I'm still going to run through everything showcased here, and that's a lot of games to get through. So let's jump into all the news, and I'll give my overall thoughts on the showcase at the end of this video. The show kicked off with the announcement of Fair Games, the debut title from Haven Studios, one of Sony's most recent acquisitions. Fair Games is a heist game all about robbing billionaires with all kinds of high-tech gadgets, and my immediate thought watching this trailer was this looks like Watch Dogs meets Payday, and there's a good reason for Fair Games' similarities to Watch Dogs, with a key figure connecting the two games. Haven Studios is led by none other than Jade Raymond, who played an instrumental role in the creation of both Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed during her time at Ubisoft. For now, there's not much more to say about Fair Games, as like far too many of the games shown in this showcase, all we got to see of Fair Games was a CGI trailer, so we know almost nothing about the game aside from its Eat the Rich message. I do like the vibe of Fair Games, but finding an audience for a brand new multiplayer IP from a new studio nonetheless is always going to be an uphill battle, and Fair Games' awful name and logo treatment, featuring a $sign for the S, isn't doing the game any favours. It's so corny and looks like a logo Ubisoft would have made 10 years ago. After it leaked way back in August of last year, this showcase saw the official unveiling of Helldivers 2, a game I am very excited about. I was shocked by just how different Helldivers 2 looks from its predecessor. While the original Helldivers was a twin-stick shooter, played from a top-down perspective, Helldivers 2 is a full-blown third-person shooter, with a behind-the-back camera perspective, and it's clearly rocking a significantly larger budget than the first game. One of my big questions about Helldivers 2 is how difficult it'll be, because the first Helldivers was absolutely brutal, and often punishing to a cartoonish degree, as you're mowed down by a teammate's turret or crushed beneath the spacecraft that's meant to be extracting you. This tongue-in-cheek trailer did seem to imply through a couple of darkly comic lines that you'll be dying a lot in Helldivers 2, but I still wouldn't be surprised if the team tries to make Helldivers 2 at least a little more approachable than the original Helldivers. Either way, I loved the first Helldivers, so I'm excited to see what Arrowhead has cooked up with this sequel. Immortals of Aveum is the latest game from EA as part of their EA Originals program that's seen the publishing monolith helping to bring smaller and more niche titles to market. Even after watching this new trailer for Immortals of Aveum, I'm still of two minds about the game. Immortals of Aveum looks like a fast, frenetic shooter in the vein of Doom, but with spellcasting replacing guns. Think Doom Eternal meets Ghostwire Tokyo, which sounds totally up my alley, but I also think the art design of Immortals of Aveum feels uninspired. It just has that very generic fantasy look to it that we've seen a million times before, and even the spells themselves look like they've been ripped straight from the MCU's Doctor Strange films. The gameplay does look fun, so I probably will still give Immortals of Aveum a shot, but it's certainly not at the top of my priorities list at the moment. Ghost Runner was a fantastic action game from a few years ago, and at this showcase we got our first look at its follow-up. I loved Ghost Runner. Its fast and violent combat and first-person platforming had such a great sense of momentum, and if one more level could achieve what they did with their first crack at this concept, I can't wait to see how refined the gameplay will feel in this sequel. The big new gameplay addition teased by this trailer is the inclusion of a motorcycle. A handful of vehicle sections could break up the normal hack and slash gameplay, and they'd fit in perfectly with the breakneck pace of Ghost Runner. I was very pleasantly surprised to see that Ghost Runner 2 is coming out later this year. I was fully expecting to see 2024 at the end of this trailer. My favourite surprise of this showcase came in the form of Phantom Blade Zero, an action RPG from Chinese developer S-Game. I thought this looked fantastic. I've heard a lot of people comparing Phantom Blade Zero to Sekiro, and while there are some similarities, it wasn't my first thought. This game reminds me way more of one of my favourite series that has been sitting on the back burner for far too long, Ninja Gaiden. From the fast, frenetic and bloody swordplay, to the snappy traversal and wall running, Phantom Blade Zero is just filled with Ninja Gaiden vibes, and thank God for that. If Koei Tecmo isn't going to give me my fix, someone has to. Interestingly, this game is part of a larger series, though the majority of titles in the series are mobile games that have never made their way out of China. And taking a look at these games, they couldn't look more different to Phantom Blade Zero. Not only are these mobile games obviously produced on a significantly smaller budget, but prior games are of a completely different genre, with the most recent game, Phantom Blade Executioners, being a side-scroller. So a full-blown action game made in Unreal Engine 5 is a big step in an ambitious new direction for S-Game. Sword of the Sea is a new game from Giant Squid, being led up by the art designer of Journey, Abzu and The Pathless. And if you've played any of those three games, I'm sure it'll come as no surprise that Sword of the Sea is utterly gorgeous. This trailer showed our protagonist gliding across sand dunes atop a giant blade, and even going full Tony Hawk by treating ancient ruins like a giant half-pipe. Sword of the Sea's beautiful vistas had me intrigued from the jump, and just one glance at Sword of the Sea's gameplay or Giant Squid's back catalogue lets you know that this game is likely going to feel wonderful to control. Sword of the Sea is definitely a game that you can count me in for. Next up, we have a sequel to a game that's been trapped in my backlog forever, the Talos Principle 2. While I've still never gotten around to the first Talos Principle, I know that it's a beloved game revered by fans for its clever puzzles and philosophical story, and while this brief CGI trailer gave us very little to go off, I'm sure the Talos Principle's hardcore fanbase is just ecstatic to finally get a sequel 8 years on from the first game. And hey, maybe the excitement surrounding this new game will finally motivate me to go back and knock the first game off of my pile of shame, even if its mind-bending puzzles will probably frustrate the ever-loving shit out of me. The most emotional trailer of the show was without a doubt Neva. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. The new game from Nomada Studio, the team behind stunning indie Grease. Neva follows a young woman and the cub of a giant magical wolf as they trek through a dying planet. Little more is known about Neva at the moment, as this trailer didn't show us what the game actually looks like in motion, but if this trailer is anything to go by, Neva is likely going to be one of the most gut-wrenching games of 2024. Cat Quest Pirates of the Purribean, the third game in the Cat Quest series, was announced during this showcase, and it's an inclusion that I'm conflicted about. because it did feel out of place here. This kind of announcement would feel more at home in something like a Nindies Direct or the Wholesome Direct. But even so, don't sleep on these games. The first two Cat Quest games are very good. They're cute little action RPGs that don't overstay their welcome, and this new pirate-themed adventure, complete with some simple naval combat, looks like a good time. But hey, I love cats and action RPGs, so this franchise feels almost tailor-made for me. Look, I'm not gonna mince words here. This next game, Foam Stars, looks bad. This shameless Splatoon clone with foam replacing the paint simply doesn't look fun. I understand on paper why Square would want to make this game. Splatoon is huge, even more so in Japan than it is in the West, and it exists largely uncontested as the only game of its kind, so it was only a matter of time before a publisher decided they wanted a piece of the pie. But if you're going to try and compete with what is currently one of Nintendo's biggest IPs, you need to do a lot better than this. Every aspect of this trailer was off-putting to me. Right off the bat, its Fortnite-esque art style quickly caused me to check out on this game. I'm just so tired of every new multiplayer game looking like this. I've been burnt out on this art style for at least a couple of years now. Then we cut to the gameplay, and somehow the trailer got infinitely worse. The movement looks slow and unsatisfying, and I can't imagine these weapons feeling good to use. The one idea that did seem cool in this trailer is building structures with your foam guns to create ramps to get the higher ground, or create a barrier to shield yourself from an enemy's attacks. But it's certainly not enough to make me want to play Foam Stars. This one's a hard pass for me. Foam Stars is another game that had no business being in a PlayStation showcase, and I can only assume that PlayStation had to put it in due to some marketing deal they have with Square Enix, maybe in exchange for exclusivity for Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XVI. They also had to take on games like Forspoken and Foam Stars. Thankfully, after suffering through Foam Stars, we got a great palate cleanser in the form of a new trailer for my most anticipated indie game, the Plucky Squire. This game follows a group of storybook characters who break through to the real world and has been high on my most anticipated games list since it was revealed at Devolver's showcase last year. And this excellent trailer highlighted exactly why I'm so excited about this game. The Plucky Squire offers an awesome gimmick where the protagonist seamlessly transitions between 2D and 3D planes, which allows for a huge amount of gameplay variety and visual creativity. If all possible futures sticks the landing, the Plucky Squire is going to be one of the most unique games of 2023. Next up, we have Teardown, a game making the jump from PC to console. There was a lot of positive buzz around Teardown when it dropped on PC last year, and looking at this trailer, I think I can see why. Teardown is a voxel-based game all about destruction, allowing you to obliterate everything in its fully destructible environments in a whole host of ridiculous ways. Teardown looks strangely cathartic, and I can imagine this being a perfect podcast game, so I could see myself losing a lot of time to this one once it's on PS5. The biggest announcement of this showcase was without question Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. In fact, it probably would have been one of the most exciting game reveals of the entire year if it hadn't leaked repeatedly in the months leading up to this showcase. But even so, it's still nice to have official confirmation of the game industry's worst kept secret. Metal Gear Solid is one of my favourite franchises, and to this day, Metal Gear Solid 3 has the best story in the series, so the prospect of a from the ground up remake is beyond exciting. Though with how long we've been hearing about this game, I was hoping we'd see more than this extremely brief CGI teaser. There are still so many questions surrounding this remake. We don't even know who exactly is making this game. Konami hasn't given any specifics on the team working on Metal Gear Solid Delta, so we don't know if anybody on the development team has worked on prior Metal Gear titles. After the showcase, we did get a brief statement from the development team at Konami, but it doesn't shine much light on the project, though this statement was accompanied by a few in-engine screenshots, which I'll throw up on screen. But the fact that this trailer didn't have even a hint of gameplay, or even a release year, makes me wonder how far along Metal Gear Solid Delta even is in development. It could still be years away at this point. It's anybody's guess. Of course, there is also a pretty big elephant in the room with this game. That being Kojima's messy exit from Konami back in 2015, following the release of Metal Gear Solid 5. So it does feel a little bit strange to see a remake of one of Kojima's most beloved games without him being involved at all. But I am still very optimistic about this remake, as they do seem to be staying true to Kojima's vision, promising a faithful remake that won't alter the story at all. Delta is even retaining the same voice acting from the original release, rather than re-recording it. This remake will simply be updating the visuals and bringing the gameplay up to modern standards, which is good, because while MGS3 is an all-time classic, there are aspects of its gameplay that feel dated. It is a PS2 game after all. I'd love to know the reason why Konami opted to remake Snake Eater before the original Metal Gear Solid, because while there are aspects of MGS3's gameplay that could be cleaned up, 2 and 3 are nowhere near as dated as the original Metal Gear Solid. I wonder if this decision was made because Metal Gear Solid 3 is often regarded as the fan favourite, or simply because as a prequel, it's the first game in the Metal Gear Solid timeline, and maybe they're planning to retell the story of Metal Gear Solid chronologically through remakes. We did get one more piece of Metal Gear Solid news at this showcase, with the announcement of Metal Gear Solid The Master Collection Volume 1. A bundle of Metal Gear Solid 1, 2 and 3 for PS5. I love these games, so I'll definitely be replaying all of them when they drop later this year. And as an avid trophy hunter, I'm stoked that I'll finally be able to get some trophies in the original Metal Gear Solid. It was also leaked after the showcase that this collection will include the 2 Metal Gear MSX games, which is a nice inclusion, but not something I'm too excited about, as I've never had any real attachment to those games. However, the most exciting part of this announcement is perhaps it being explicitly labelled as Volume 1, and I can't wait to see what Volume 2 is. Will we finally get a PS5 port of Metal Gear Solid 4, which has been stranded on the PS3 for 15 years now? Or could they go a step further and even give us Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, the GameCube remake of Metal Gear Solid that's never been re-released? Or how about Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops? But hey, this is all probably a pipe dream that won't happen, but it's fun to speculate. And even if we don't get any of my more outlandish picks, a collection of MGS 4, 5 and Peace Walker for Volume 2 still sounds like a pretty sweet proposition. Next, we arrive at another game I have no idea how to pronounce, but I'm gonna go with Towers of Aghasba, an open world game that juggles exploration and a robust town building system. You'll even be able to visit the islands of your friends to see their creations. While I like the art style and creature design of Towers of Aghasba, and will always be a sucker for a Breath of the Wild-esque glider, it's very rare for a town building game to click with me, so I don't think this will be a game for me. We got one last big push for Final Fantasy XVI in this showcase, and to be honest, this is a trailer I could have done without. Not because I'm not excited for Final Fantasy XVI, in fact, quite the contrary. I cannot wait for this game, and while I think this is a good trailer that does a great job of showcasing Final Fantasy XVI's dramatic story, exciting character action game inspired combat, and the jaw-dropping spectacle of its epic icon battles, I'm simply at the point where I don't need to see any more of 16. I'm already completely sold. If this game delivers in the way I'm expecting it to, I think we're going to have something very special on our hands with Final Fantasy XVI, and perhaps even one of the best games in Final Fantasy's 35-year history. Next up, we have a game I've been waiting over a decade for, Alan Wake 2. If it wasn't for the closer, this would have easily been my game of the show. We've known for a while that Alan Wake 2 will be leaning further into horror than the first game, with Remedy saying that Alan Wake 2 will be a full-blown survival horror game, unlike the first Alan Wake, which they consider an action game with horror elements. And you can really see what they meant by that in this trailer filled with creepy cult members and grim, gloomy environments. This new trailer not only gave us our first look at Alan Wake 2's gameplay, but also revealed that Alan isn't the only character we'll be playing as this time around. In Alan Wake 2, we'll also be controlling Saga Anderson, an FBI agent investigating a spate of ritual killings in the town of Bright Falls. Alan and Saga's stories are separate yet intertwined, and you can tackle the two stories in any order you like, bouncing back and forth between the two characters freely. I'd also be remiss to not mention just how gorgeous Alan Wake 2 looks. From the character models to the lighting, every aspect of this game is a visual feast, and it would seem that Remedy has no shortage of confidence in Alan Wake 2's graphics, with the team's communications director tweeting, "The Alan Wake 2 trailer in the PlayStation showcase was 100% running on PlayStation 5. I want to really point that out. We did say in 2021 that we're gonna push the graphics hard on this one. I think we'll have the best looking game in 2023. That's a bold claim, but if Alan Wake 2 hits the level of graphical fidelity promised by this trailer, it's sure to be one of the best showcases of what the PS5 and Series X are capable of that we've seen yet. Alan Wake was my favourite Xbox 360 exclusive back in the day, and I've been clamouring for this sequel for so long that it's almost hard to believe that it's finally coming, and I certainly wasn't expecting it to be coming so soon. While we had a vague release window of 2023, I thought for sure this game would get delayed into 2024 due to how brief its initial reveal was. But I guess not, because Alan Wake 2 is dropping on the 17th of October. My only disappointment with Alan Wake 2 was the news that it'll only be released digitally. Remedy says this is to keep the game's price down, which I can appreciate, but as a fan of physical media and someone who believes deeply in the importance of game preservation, I still would have loved a physical copy of Alan Wake 2, but that's certainly not going to stop me from being all over this game on day one. Less than a week before the release of Alan Wake 2, another game I'm very excited for will be dropping, and that game is Assassin's Creed Mirage. Mirage promises to be a throwback to the Assassin's Creed games of the past. Unlike the last three AC games, Odyssey, Origins and Valhalla, which were massive RPGs, Mirage is designed to be a more scaled back experience, taking place in one compact but very dense city, and putting the focus back on parkour, stealth, and of course assassination, through the return of the black box assassination missions that were featured in Assassin's Creed Unity and Syndicate. These big set-piece missions give you a target at the centre of a sandbox location and offer you a variety of different ways to take them down. Everything Ubisoft is saying about this game appeals to me. While I've largely enjoyed the RPG era of Assassin's Creed, I think it's impossible to deny that those games are overly padded out, especially Valhalla. So I'm grateful to be getting a more stripped back and focused Assassin's Creed game to mix things up. And if this trailer is anything to go by, Mirage is shaping up to be everything I could ask for out of an Assassin's Creed game. No matter what criticisms I may have of this conference, one thing it didn't have a shortage of was high-profile indie games, another of which was Revenant Hill, the debut game from the Glory Society, a studio founded by two of the three creators behind the critical darling Night in the Woods, and Revenant Hill utilises an extremely similar art style to that game. In Revenant Hill, you play as Twigs the cat, a witch as familiar who has to make his own way in the world after the barn he was living in burned down. While the trailer didn't shine too much light on what kind of game Revenant Hill will be, thankfully, after the showcase, a meaty write-up on the game from the Glory Society's technical director, Kobe West, was published on the PlayStation blog, and I want to read a portion of this write-up about the gameplay verbatim, because it makes Revenant Hill sound absurd in all the right ways, and shows that the team are infusing the game with a good amount of humour. Grow crops to sell at the secret market or use for your own purposes. Put down roots. Run through the fields and the trees. Watch the seasons pass. Make friends who become neighbours who become family. Also enemies. That's unavoidable sometimes. Figure out what the ghosts want. Host increasingly ambitious parties for witches and demons and other things that don't have proper names. Get tangled up in a world in the midst of violent change. Build a community by accident. Square dance with a possum. Eat mice. Learn to write. Cobble together some hexes and charms. Do dangerous things with your new friends. And jot it all down in your journal. See the world, or at least the stranger parts of it. Meet whatever it is that lives there. Work your way up the ladder towards your dream job of being a fully licensed familiar. If this description doesn't sell you on Revenant Hill, I don't know what will. Granblue Fantasy is a franchise that is massive in Japan, especially in the mobile market, but it's never fully broken through to the Western world. The series' fighting game spin-off, Granblue Fantasy Versus, made a bit of a splash in the fighting game community when it dropped in 2020, and reviews were largely positive, but it felt like the buzz around it died down quite quickly. So I'm sure Cygames are hoping that Relink might be the game that helps the series gain some traction in the West. Relink has an interesting history behind it. When it was originally announced, it was being developed by Platinum Games, but at some point in development, they were taken off the project, and it was moved in-house to be developed internally by Cygames. Though its tumultuous development cycle doesn't seem to have harmed the game too much if the trailers are anything to go by. This game will likely be my introduction to the Granblue universe, because while I was interested in Versus and even downloaded it when it was free on PS Plus, I never actually got around to playing it, so hopefully I can make time for Relink, because it looks like something I'd love. I love a good action RPG, and the flashy combat that this trailer focused on was giving me major Tales vibes. I'm also just a sucker for this kind of anime aesthetic. Next, Capcom gave us a new story trailer for Street Fighter VI, and this trailer falls into the same boat as Final Fantasy XVI for me. I'm stoked for this game, but I was already all in on it. This is probably the most excited I've ever been for a Street Fighter game, but I didn't need to see more of it, especially this close to launch. And at this point, we've already seen so much that it doesn't feel like Capcom even had anything more to show before launch, so there wasn't even anything new or noteworthy to talk about in this trailer. But hey, I get it. Capcom needs to make that one final marketing push. And at the time of this video's release, Street Fighter VI is out, and at the time of recording, it's currently sitting at a 92 on Metacritic. I've already put about 12 hours into Street Fighter VI, and I've loved every second I've spent with it so far, so be sure to keep an eye out for my full review in the future. Can we also just take a moment to appreciate the fact that Street Fighter VI is made in RE Engine? RE Engine has to be one of the most robust and flexible engines in the entire industry, with how many visually spectacular games with entirely different art styles are coming out of it. Ultros is a brand new Metroidvania with a bizarre psychedelic art style, and I've gotta be real, this trailer did nothing for me. I love Metroidvanias, but I don't find myself drawn to Ultros' trippy visuals, and there was something about the animation that made the character's movements look rigid and clunky. Of course, I can't say for certain that it feels that way without playing it, but I think this is one that I can safely skip. While Ultros isn't a game for me, if you are in the market for a crazy acid trip of a game, it might hold more appeal for you. Yet another inclusion I could have done without was Tower of Fantasy, a game that's been available on mobile and PC since last August. When I say this showcase had too much fluff, this is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. A port of a mobile game that obviously takes more than a little inspiration from Genshin Impact is not showcase-worthy news. This is something that could just be announced in a PlayStation blog post. I don't mean to criticise this game so harshly, I'm sure the game itself could be perfectly fine. Genshin Impact with mechs sounds like a good enough time, but its inclusion is far from exciting and is representative of everything wrong with this showcase. At least Tower of Fate was followed up with one of the biggest bangers of the showcase, Dragon's Dogma II. After the team at Capcom confirmed the existence of this game last year through a t-shirt, We finally got our first look at Dragon's Dogma 2 last week. I was fully expecting our first teaser of this game to be a pre-rendered trailer, but I was pleasantly surprised that this trailer was almost entirely gameplay, and I think this was easily one of the best trailers of the show. For better or worse, it seems like Dragon's Dogma 2 will share a lot in common with its predecessor. From the shot in the trailer of a dragon plucking the Arisen's heart from their chest, just like the opening of the original Dragon's Dogma, to the pawns' faces that still sit squarely in the uncanny valley. Thankfully, Dragon's Dogma's greatest strength was always its battles, and this trailer gave us a glimpse at the skill sets of Dragon's Dogma 2's various classes, be it the sword and board action of a fighter, the bow-focused techniques of a strider, or the spellcasting of a mage. Of course, the best part of the original Dragon's Dogma was the way it allowed you to scale an enemy as if you were playing Shadow of the Colossus to really get in there and deal heavy damage to their weak points. And we saw this mechanic in action in this trailer through an awesome shot of the Arisen mounting a griffin and attacking it in mid-air. The first Dragon's Dogma was a bit rough around the edges, but its combat mechanics were remarkable. And if Capcom takes that rock-solid foundation and refines it in a more polished sequel, Dragon's Dogma 2 has the potential to be incredible. Never finishing the original Dragon's Dogma is one of my great gaming shames, and the literal first thing I did once this showcase ended was boot up my PS5 and reinstall Dark Arisen to finally correct that. Though between Tears of the Kingdom, Street Fighter VI, Diablo 4 and Final Fantasy XVI, who the hell knows when I'm going to find the time to get around to it. At this point, we got into the VR portion of the showcase. I was always skeptical about PSVR 2. I had a PSVR and I didn't use it enough to feel like it justified the cost, so I've been taking a wait and see approach with PSVR 2 since its announcement. With its limited software lineup and high cost of entry, I was never optimistic about the future of this device, and this showcase did nothing to change that. I was shocked that we didn't get a single first-party VR game from Sony. I would have bet for sure we would have seen a new Astrobot game. Horizon Call of the Mountain is not enough, and the fact that that's still the only AAA first-party game for PSVR 2 is mind-boggling. It feels like even Sony has no faith in this device. If something doesn't change soon, PSVR 2 is going to be dead in the water. Seeing as I don't have much to say about most of the VR games here, I'll blaze through this section of the conference quite quickly. The first of 6 VR games shown in this showcase was Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2. I'm going to be real with you. I have literally no interest in Five Nights at Freddy's. I've never played any of these games, and I probably never will. At this point, there are a million of these games that all look exactly the same to me. But with the Five Nights at Freddy's movie coming out later this year, it makes sense to reveal a new game to capitalise on fans' excitement. The most high-profile VR game shown was the Resident Evil 4 Remake VR mode. I loved Resident Evil 4 Remake, and it's definitely in the running for my Game of the Year, and this VR version looks like another excellent way to experience Resi 4. Though that shouldn't come as a surprise, as Capcom has done a fantastic job of translating Resident Evil 7, Village, and even the original Resident Evil 4 to VR, so I'm sure this will be one of PSVR 2's best games. If you want to hear more of me ranting about how fantastic the Resident Evil 4 remake is, you can find my review of it on my channel. I know, shameless plug. One of the most bland trailers of this showcase was for Arizona Sunshine 2. I know that people like the first Arizona Sunshine, but I thought this trailer did a horrendous job of selling Arizona Sunshine 2. This trailer showed a bunch of zombie killing action and highlighted Arizona Sunshine's wacky sense of humour. But the entire time I was watching this trailer, I was just thinking, there are hundreds of other games that look exactly like this, and this trailer did nothing to tell me what makes Arizona Sunshine 2 different. It doesn't offer a unique spin on the genre, and all of the jokes in this trailer have been made countless times before. Everything about this trailer was so generic that I couldn't bring myself to care at all, and this is coming from someone who loves zombie games. I literally platinumed Dead Island 2 less than a month ago, so if you're not even holding my attention, I doubt that you're getting the average viewers. Crossfire is a juggernaut in the Asian market, but following the abysmal Crossfire X, it's safe to say that Western players don't hold the series in the same esteem. But it seems like Smilegate is taking another crack at the Western market with Crossfire Sierra Squad. While the idea of playing this kind of game in VR can sound overwhelming, I don't think it's necessarily a bad investment for Smilegate. One of the most popular games on the original PSVR was Firewall 0 Hour, a game that shares a lot of similarities with Sierra Squad. So if this is a well-made shooter, I could see Sierra Squadron finding a small but hardcore audience. In my opinion, the most intriguing looking VR game of the lineup was easily Synapse, a VR action game that combines gunplay and telekinesis. This game has a distinct look and the gameplay seems fun. It also helps that Synapse has an all-star voice cast, including Mass Effect's Jennifer Hale and Solid Snake himself, David Hayter. While it's not going to be a system seller, if I ever do end up picking up a PSVR 2, this is a game I'd be curious to try out. The final announcement of the VR portion of this showcase was a PSVR 2 port of Beat Saber. And surprise, it's out right now, alongside a new DLC pack full of Queen songs, which is why I've muted this trailer. I'm certainly not looking for a copyright strike for playing Don't Stop Me Now. It's great that this game is finally on PSVR 2, and I love a good shadow drop, but I also can't help but feel like this game should have already been available on PSVR 2. At this point, Beat Saber is so synonymous with VR that I was baffled that it wasn't part of PSVR 2's launch lineup. Taking us out of the VR section was one of the biggest announcements of the showcase, Marathon, a reboot of Bungie's classic shooter series. The Marathon trilogy far predates Halo, with all three games being released on Mac between 1994 and 1996, but the series has been laying dormant since. Now 27 years after the last Marathon game was released, Bungie is rebooting the series in the form of an extraction shooter. While this was yet another CGI trailer, and I would have much preferred if Bungie held out on revealing Marathon until they had some gameplay to show, I did find the art style of this trailer very striking. It's still distinctly sci-fi, but it looks totally different to Halo or Destiny. I know some fans of the original Marathon games were disappointed to hear that this is multiplayer only, when the original games were known for their single-player campaigns. But as someone who's never touched the Marathon trilogy, I was into the vibe of this trailer, and think this could be an interesting way to resurrect Marathon. I've never gotten fully invested in an extraction shooter, but knowing how incredible the gunplay always feels in Bungie games, I think there's a good chance that this could be the one that finally gets its hooks in me. Of course, Bungie's big cash cow for the past decade has been Destiny, and Destiny 2 is continuing to truck on 6 years on from launch, and its latest expansion, The Final Shape, was unveiled during this showcase. The big takeaway from this brief CGI trailer was that The Final Shape will see the return of fan favourite character Cayde 6, who was killed off in the Forsaken expansion. Cayde 6 is a beloved character and is voiced by an iconic actor in Nathan Fillion, so I can understand why Bungie would want to bring him back. But they need to be very careful with how they handle this expansion. Bringing characters back from the dead is a dangerous game. It's going to get a huge initial pop from fans, and it may even pull some lapsed players back into Destiny, but if Bungie isn't careful, they could undermine their prior stories and completely devalue the emotional impact that Forsaken had on players. The penultimate game of this showcase, Concord, had a trailer that bothered me more than anything else in this showcase. This is the worst kind of trailer in my opinion. A brief CGI teaser that tells you nothing about the game. A blog post after the presentation explained that Concord is a PvP multiplayer FPS. But what part of this trailer tells you that? Going off this trailer, this game could be just about anything. The only thing it tells us is that it takes place in a sci-fi setting. This is made all the more strange by the fact that Firewalk claims this game is coming out next year. If this game is really releasing in 2024, surely you've got more to show than just this. And if this is all you've got, don't show it yet. Just hold off until you have something more substantial to show. This isn't a Wolverine situation where it's a known IP and its very existence is enough to get people excited. At this point, we got something else that didn't need to be in this showcase, a trailer for the Gran Turismo movie. Look, I'm sure it'll be a perfectly fine movie. It's got a decent director in Neil Blomkamp, and a solid cast with actors like Orlando Bloom and David Harbour. But at this point in the showcase, a movie trailer was the last thing I wanted to see. Before we got to the final game of the show, we got two quick hardware announcements, both of which had leaked long before the showcase. The first of which is Project Q, a handheld device designed purely for remote play. It's essentially a DualSense controller split in half with an 8-inch LED screen slapped in the middle. I do like using remote play when I'm grinding for trophies in games, so I can watch something on TV at the same time, and I think it's cool that Project Q has all the features of the DualSense controller built in. So if the price is right on this thing, I'd be down to pick one up. My only concern is what the battery life will be like. The DualSense itself doesn't have the best battery life, so putting all those features into a handheld device is sure to be taxing on the battery. The second hardware announcement was a pair of PlayStation Bluetooth earbuds, and again, I'm intrigued. If these things have good quality sound and once again are priced reasonably, I'd be very interested, because I've always found in-ear earbuds much more comfortable than overhead headphones. And finally, as expected, the show closed out with the big one, Spider-Man 2. And yes, it looks every bit as fantastic as we all expected. The trailer kicked off with our first look at one of the game's major villains, Kraven the Hunter, who both looks and sounds perfect. We then immediately jumped straight into a meaty gameplay demo that began by showing a symbiote suit Spidey in action. Pete's fighting style is noticeably more violent when he's rocking the black suit, allowing you to take a more aggressive approach in fights, with shots of Spider-Man pinning someone up against a wall and pummeling them with a barrage of kicks, and picking up 4 enemies at once with his symbiote tendrils and slamming them into the ground. So we're already starting to see the suit corrupting Pete, even more so with him being a little standoffish and snippy with Miles throughout the rest of the demo. And you know at some point in this game, we're going to have to fight Pete as Miles and bring him back from the brink when he fully gives in to the symbiote's influence. Speaking of Miles, it's at this point the demo switched over to Miles' perspective and we saw some of the new abilities we'll have in Spider-Man 2. The most exciting of which is the web wings, which let our Spider-Men glide along air currents at a breakneck speed. In these moments, you can see the PS5's SSD in action. Miles is moving so fast and the world is keeping up with him with zero pop-in. This is something that definitely wouldn't have been possible on the PS4. Another new mechanic that caught my eye was Miles making his own web tightropes to scuttle around on. This mechanic has the potential to make Spider-Man 2's stealth sections feel much more dynamic than the first games. The presentation closed out with a massive Uncharted-esque set piece that saw Miles chasing down a drone and taking down a series of jet ski riding goons, before getting chased himself by a very monstrous looking version of the lizard. This entire section looked stunning and is exactly what I want out of this game. I appreciate that Insomniac were able to give us a significant look at Spider-Man 2 without feeling like they were showing too much. I still have so many questions about this game, the majority of which revolve around Venom, who we saw in the teaser trailer for Spider-Man 2 back in 2021. Namely, who is Venom in this game? Is it going to be Eddie Brock, who we know exists in this universe but hasn't been fully introduced yet, or someone else? There was an implied connection between Harry Osborn and the symbiote in the first game. Could he be our new Venom? Or is it going to be Peter after he fully succumbs to the suit? If you've played Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales, you know that Yuri Lowenthal and Naji Jeter are perfectly cast in their roles as Peter and Miles, and they sound as flawless as ever here. though I did find it funny that with Peter taking a darker turn in this game, you can hear a little bit of Yuri's Sasuke voice coming through at points. Spider-Man 2 is easily my most anticipated game of the rest of the year, and this showing left me more excited than ever to get my hands on it. And there you have it. That was everything announced in the May 2023 PlayStation Showcase, and I am shocked by how underwhelmed I was with this showcase. While I wouldn't call the show bad, as there were a good amount of quality games here, it certainly didn't live up to the expectations set by prior PlayStation showcases, and as I said at the beginning of this video, it felt more like an extended state of play than a big blowout PlayStation showcase. The term PlayStation Showcase meant something and carried a far higher degree of prestige than the state of play, and now I don't know if it does. The PlayStation Showcase before this one had the reveals of Spider-Man 2, Wolverine and the Knights of the Old Republic remake, and showed us God of War Ragnarok gameplay. The showcase before that one featured the announcements of Final Fantasy XVI, Hogwarts Legacy and God of War Ragnarok, as well as gameplay demos of Spider-Man Miles Morales and Demon's Souls. Just compare these lists of games to the ones we talked about today, and this showcase pales in comparison. The problem with holding an underwhelming showcase like this is that now when Sony announces a PlayStation showcase in the future, we're going to wonder if it'll be the kind of showcase that we previously associated that name with, or something more akin to this showcase. They've tarnished their branding. State of Play was the show we always went into wondering if it was going to be a good one or not. With the name PlayStation Showcase, you knew that they were going to bring the heat. Now we don't. Let's get into why I was so disappointed with this showcase. Firstly, I think the show just got off on the wrong foot by starting with Fair Games, a title that's a bit of a harder sell. You need to begin with a big heavy hitter to pull the audience in. Start with Metal Gear or even Dragon's Dogma. Hell, I would have even put the Final Fantasy XVI trailer here. Then we have the disappointment of how many games here showed no gameplay whatsoever, and the lack of firm release dates. The fact that there were 34 games shown and 27 of them don't have release dates is utterly ridiculous. But my biggest problem with this showcase was the lack of first-party games. Traditionally, one of the major differences between a state of play and a showcase has been that showcases tend to be where we see big first-party Sony titles. Coming out of this, I was left with more questions than answers regarding PlayStation's first-party studios. We still don't know what many of Sony's biggest studios are working on after this event. So many of the things that have been speculated about simply didn't come to fruition. Think of all the things we could have reasonably guessed would have been here. We got no tease for Ghost of Tsushima 2, no reveal of what Bluepoint's next remake will be, no announcement of what Ben's next project after Days Gone will be, no new Twisted Metal game despite a TV show being imminent, and no Last of Us factions, though at least we now know why that is, with Naughty Dog saying they need more time to work on the project, and reports claiming that it needed to be substantially reworked following feedback Bungie gave to Naughty Dog. This showcase also raised concerns for me about the logistics of Sony's investment into games as a service titles. For several generations, PlayStation has been the place to be if you want big, extremely polished single-player games. And as someone who's more drawn to story-driven experiences than multiplayer games, it's kept me a devout PlayStation fan for basically my entire life. But not everybody is like me, and it's clear that multiplayer games are something that the PlayStation ecosystem has been lacking, a problem that Sony is finally correcting. But I'm concerned that Sony may have overcorrected and bet too much on live service games. This is a very competitive field, and for every success story, there are 10 failures. So I worry that games like Fair Games and Concord could drop and be dead on arrival. Overall, this showcase was significantly heavier on third-party games than first-party titles, and I don't want to sound overly negative, because there were still a lot of games here that spoke to me. Metal Gear Solid Delta is incredibly exciting. Games like Alan Wake 2, Assassin's Creed Mirage, Phantom Blade Zero, and Dragon's Dogma 2 looked great. And Sony did a wonderful job of curating and putting the spotlight on a bunch of excellent looking indies like Sword of the Sea, The Plucky Squire, and Revenant Hill. But this showcase also felt overly bloated, as it was bogged down with games like Street Fighter VI and Final Fantasy XVI that were so close to release that I didn't need to see any more of them, and games like Foam Stars that have no business being in a PlayStation showcase. These inclusions massively hurt the pacing of the show, and took what could have been a B tier conference and dragged it down to a C tier. I guess it's up to Jeff Keighley and Xbox to bring the hype that we've come to expect out of this season. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can find countless other videos on my channel, including my recent review of Resident Evil 4, and be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming review of Dead Island 2.